They told me to take the money and disappear, that fighting would destroy me, that a man with his resources could bury the truth forever. I had a newborn daughter, $17 in my checking account, and a DNA test that said he was lying. What I didn't know was that the truth I was fighting for would unravel secrets far bigger than my own. If you stay with me through this, I promise you'll understand why some battles take a decade to win. This isn't a fairy tale. It's messier than that, more complicated, more human. My name is Simone, and this is the story of how I went from a studio apartment in Queens to a seat on the board of a pharmaceutical empire worth $8 billion. But not the way you think. I was 28 when I met Christopher Thornton. I'd been working as an art consultant for about 3 years, doing well enough to feel like I was finally building something. I grew up in Georgia, worked my way through state college, moved to New York with big dreams, and a realistic understanding that most of those dreams wouldn't come true. I was okay with that. I liked my life. Christopher was different from anyone I'd ever met. Not because he was wealthy, though he was obscenely so, but because he seemed genuinely curious about the world beyond his bubble. We met at a gallery opening in Chelsea. He asked thoughtful questions about the artist's use of negative space. We talked for 2 hours about everything except his money. When he finally told me his last name, I didn't recognize it. I had to Google Thornton Pharmaceuticals later that night. Our relationship lasted 6 months. Looking back now, I can see the red flags I ignored. He never introduced me to his family. He was vague about his schedule. He had rules about where we could go in public. At the time, I told myself he was protecting me from his complicated world. The truth was simpler and uglier. He was protecting his image from me. When I got pregnant, I genuinely believed we'd figure it out together. We were adults. We cared about each other. These things happen. I was nervous telling him, but not terrified. I should have been terrified. His response was clinical. He didn't get angry or emotional. He simply said, "I need you to understand my position. My family has expectations. My life is complicated in ways you can't understand. This situation is unfortunate, but it's manageable." Manageable. He called our child a situation that was manageable. He wrote a check, $250,000. At the time, it was more money than I'd see in 5 years of working. He slid it across his kitchen counter and said, "This is generous. Take it, sign the NDA, and we both move on with our lives. Or don't, and I'll make sure you regret it." I left the check on his counter. I walked out of his penthouse and threw up in the lobby bathroom. Not from morning sickness, from the realization that I'd completely misjudged who he was. What came next was worse than I imagined. Christopher didn't just disappear. He preemptively struck. His lawyers sent cease and desist letters to my employer, claiming I was harassing their client. I lost my job. They filed restraining orders that were later dismissed, but served their purpose of making me look unstable. When I finally scraped together enough money to file a paternity suit, they buried me in motions and delays. The court ordered a DNA test. Simple biology, right? Except his legal team found every possible procedural delay. Jurisdiction questions, lab certification challenges, scheduling conflicts that mysteriously lasted months. Meanwhile, Christopher got engaged to Vanessa Clark. Their wedding was in the Times. I was 6 months pregnant, working as a receptionist because no gallery would hire me anymore. I gave birth to Lyric on a Tuesday in March. My mother flew up from Georgia, still weak from her second round of chemo. She held my hand through labor because nobody else was there. When the nurses placed my daughter in my arms, I felt 2 things simultaneously: overwhelming love and crushing fear. How was I going to do this alone? The DNA test finally happened when Lyric was 14 months old. 99.9% match. The judge ordered child support of $8,000 a month. Christopher appealed. His lawyers argued the amount was excessive. They claimed I was inflating my expenses. They suggested I was deliberately keeping Lyric from forming other paternal bonds to preserve the financial relationship. We spent the next 6 years in and out of court. Christopher paid support, but always late, always with some deduction his lawyers justified. He never met Lyric, never called, never sent a birthday card. His lawyers made it clear that complying with court orders didn't mean acknowledging her as his daughter in any meaningful way. I worked. God, did I work. During the day, I was an administrative assistant at a medical office. Evenings, I freelanced as a grant writer. Weekends, I did virtual assistant work for a startup. My mother moved in with us until she passed away when Lyric was 4. After that, it was just us. Lyric was 6 when she first asked why her daddy didn't want to meet her. I'd been preparing for that question for years, had read books about how to handle it, but nothing prepares you for your child's face when she asks why she isn't wanted. I told her the truth in age-appropriate language, that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people. And it's not about the child's worth, but about the adult's limitations. She nodded like she understood, but she stopped asking after that. The silence was worse than the questions. Then, 7 years after I filed that first paternity suit, something strange happened. I received an envelope at my apartment. No return address. Inside were bank statements from accounts in Christopher's name. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands showing transfers of hundreds of millions of dollars. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe documents meant for someone else, but my name was on the envelope, and inside was a single typed note: "He's hiding more than you know. More coming soon." Over the next 3 months, more envelopes arrived. Each one contained financial documents that painted a disturbing picture. Christopher wasn't just wealthy. He was systematically siphoning money from Thornton Pharmaceuticals through shell corporations, fake consulting contracts, inflated vendor agreements, money laundering through real estate deals. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from his own family's company. I took the documents to a lawyer, expecting to be told they were fake or inadmissible, or that I couldn't do anything with them. Instead, she went pale as she read through them. "Simone, this is federal crime territory. If these are real, he's not just hiding assets from you. He's committing massive fraud." I didn't know what to do with that information. I was a single mother working 3 jobs. I couldn't take on a federal fraud case, but the envelopes kept coming, and the picture they painted got darker. Christopher was planning to dissolve the family trust fund before any of his children, including Lyric, could claim their inheritance at age 18. He was moving money into untraceable accounts, preparing to essentially bankrupt the Thornton fortune while securing billions for himself. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Christopher's legitimate children, Harrison and Portia, would be victims of this too. His siblings, who'd inherited portions of the family trust, were being robbed. Whoever was sending me these documents wanted Christopher stopped, and they'd chosen me as the vehicle to do it. I made a decision that terrified me. I reached out to Christopher's siblings, Bradley and Genevieve, through my lawyer. I requested a meeting and came prepared with copies of everything I'd received. I half expected them to call security or accuse me of manufacturing evidence. Instead, they sat in stunned silence as they read through documents that proved their brother had been stealing from them for over a decade. "Why would someone send this to you?" Genevieve finally asked. She was younger than Christopher by 6 years, a surgeon who'd mostly stayed out of family business. "I don't know," I admitted, "but someone with access to his most private financial dealings wants this exposed, and they trust me to do something with it." Bradley, the youngest sibling who worked in the company's research division, looked shattered. "Our father groomed Christopher to take over, gave him control over accounts, trusted him completely. This will kill Dad." 3 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Corner of 68th and Lexington. It's time we met." I went. I was terrified it was a setup, that Christopher had somehow found out and was going to threaten me in person. Instead, I found Vanessa sitting in a back booth, wearing sunglasses inside and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "I'm the one who sent you the documents," she said without preamble, "and I need your help to finish this." Vanessa's story came out in fragments over 2 hours of coffee that went cold. She'd married Christopher, believing he was someone he wasn't. The control started small, monitoring her credit card purchases, questioning who she talked to, isolating her from friends by creating conflicts, and then positioning himself as the only person she could trust. After their son Harrison was born, it got worse. Christopher became paranoid about her spending, about her activities, about everything. He accused her of affairs she never had. He threatened to take Harrison if she ever left. When their daughter Portia was born, Vanessa started planning her escape. She hired a private investigator to document Christopher's affairs and hoping to build a case for divorce. What the investigator found was far worse than infidelity. The financial crimes, the hidden accounts, the systematic theft from his own company. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years," Vanessa said, "but I couldn't expose him without destroying my children's inheritance and their relationship with their grandfather. Then I found out about you and Lyric. I read the court transcripts. I saw what he did to you, and I realized he doesn't just use people. He's pathological about it. He needs to be stopped, but I can't do it alone. If it comes from me, his family will think it's a vindictive divorce. If it comes from you, they'll have to take it seriously," I finished. Vanessa nodded. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "There's another child, a boy in London. Christopher did the same thing to his mother. Denied paternity, fought her in court, paid her off with an NDA after she threatened to go public. His name is Oliver, he's 7, and there are probably others. I found evidence of at least 3 more NDAs paid to women over the years. We weren't dealing with a man who made a mistake. We were dealing with someone who had a pattern of using women and discarding them and their children without conscience." Vanessa and I made a plan. We'd approach Montgomery Thornton, Christopher's father, together with everything we had: the fraud, the hidden accounts, the secret children. We'd force the family patriarch to choose: protect his son or protect the family legacy. The meeting with Montgomery was in his study at the family's Connecticut estate. He was 81, still sharp, still commanding. Genevieve and Bradley were there too. Vanessa and I presented everything: the financial documents, the offshore accounts, the evidence of systematic theft. Then Vanessa showed him the file on Oliver and the other NDAs. Montgomery aged 10 years in that hour. He asked questions, demanded to see original documents, challenged details, but the evidence was overwhelming. His son had stolen from the family, betrayed multiple women, abandoned multiple children, and was preparing to dissolve the trust fund that his own grandfather had established. "What do you want?" Montgomery finally asked, looking at me directly. "I want Lyric to be acknowledged," I said. "Not just legally, which is already done, but by this family. I want Christopher held accountable, which means federal authorities need to see these documents. And I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Montgomery called his lawyers that night. Within a week, federal investigators were reviewing the evidence. The IRS opened an investigation. The Thornton Pharmaceuticals Board launched an internal audit. The carefully constructed facade of Christopher's life began to crack. Christopher must have sensed it coming. He tried to leave the country, booked a last-minute flight to Dubai. Federal agents stopped him at JFK. The media circus that followed was brutal and surreal. The man who'd made me look like a liar in court was now being exposed as a fraud on national news. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Christopher took a plea deal: 8 years in federal prison, restitution of $400 million to the family trust, and agreement to cooperate fully in the investigation. He lost his position at Thornton Pharmaceuticals. His father publicly removed him from the board and from any future leadership role. The family court reconvened for our case. Given everything that had emerged, the judge was not sympathetic to Christopher. His parental rights regarding Lyric were terminated at his own lawyer's recommendation. They knew he'd lose if they fought it. The back child support was recalculated with penalties: $4.7 million. And because Lyric was legally entitled to a portion of the family trust, The judge appointed me as her guardian, with full control over those assets, until she turned 18. Then Montgomery did something unexpected. He requested a meeting at my apartment. He wanted to meet Lyric. I was hesitant, protective, but he came alone, this elderly man who'd built an empire and just watched his son destroy it from within. He cried when he met her, not performatively, but genuine tears of grief and regret. "She looks like my mother," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't fight for you both. I'm sorry I believed my son's version without questioning." Montgomery asked if we'd come to family events, if he could know his granddaughter. Genevieve and Bradley reached out too, wanting to build relationships with their niece. Vanessa and I became friends, bonded by the shared experience of surviving the same person. The board offered me a position as a non-executive director, representing Lyric's interests. I almost turned it down. I had no business background, no pharmaceutical experience. But Genevieve convinced me. "You understand accountability in ways that people in our world forget. We need that perspective." I accepted. I'm not pretending I'm qualified to make decisions about drug development or manufacturing processes. But when discussions turn to executive compensation, to corporate ethics, to community impact, I have something to contribute. I pushed for the company to fund single-parent support programs, to improve healthcare access in underserved communities. Not because I'm some savior, but because I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Lyric is 12 now. She knows her father and knows he's in prison. She knows she has half-siblings who she sees regularly. Harrison and Portia are good kids, confused and hurt by their father's actions, but trying to understand. They don't visit Christopher. None of his children do. That was their choice, not something any of us imposed. Christopher writes letters sometimes, not to Lyric. He's legally prohibited, but to his father, to his siblings, trying to explain his actions. They've stopped reading them. Some things can't be explained away. I think about the woman I was 10 years ago, standing in Christopher's penthouse, staring at that check. If I'd taken it, he'd still be stealing. There would be more women, more children, more victims. My pain had purpose, not because suffering is noble, but because refusing to be silenced meant he couldn't keep operating in darkness. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about the long, exhausting work of holding powerful people accountable. It's about the ways that systems protect certain people until the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. It's about the fact that justice is rarely swift or satisfying, but sometimes, eventually, it arrives. Lyric asked me recently if I'm glad I fought. I told her the truth. I'm glad she exists. I'm glad she knows who she is. I'm glad she has a grandfather and aunt and uncle who love her. I'm glad Christopher can't hurt anyone else. Whether I'm glad about the decade of court battles and financial struggles and sleepless nights, that's more complicated. But I'd do it again, because the alternative was teaching her that some people's lies matter more than other people's truth. That's my story. It took 10 years to live, and probably 20 minutes for you to read or listen to. If it resonated with you, I appreciate you sharing it or letting me know in the comments. Not for attention, but because I think these stories matter. They remind us that accountability is possible, even when it seems impossible. I'm Simone. This was The Fortune He Tried to Hide. Thanks for listening.